I'm Norman Robinson, and welcome to you all to Affordable Housing Matters. The look of the city of New Orleans has changed drastically over the last few years. As you know, natural disasters, the coronavirus pandemic, and the changes in local and state government have a lot to do with what we see as we travel on the streets of our city. One noticeable difference is the increase of the homeless or unhoused population on the streets of New Orleans. Joining me on today's program is a council member who has spearheaded an initiative to minimize the unhoused population in the Crescent City. No small task. Councilmember Lesli Harris, welcome to Affordable Housing Matters.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, it's nice to have you here. It's nice to see somebody take the proverbial bull by the horns. Now, this is a monumental task you've taken on for yourself. You've kind of put yourself out there
I have.
as the flag bearer for this issue.
I have, but it was necessary for someone to take leadership on this issue. And so my office has really spearheaded, as you said, efforts to reduce homelessness, especially in District B, where we see a lot of folks under Calliope, around Tchoupitoulas, but it's throughout our city. And so we've done several things to try to minimize homelessness in New Orleans. The first thing was creating the Office of Homeless Services and Strategies with Nate Fields, who I think that you've met. He's an amazing person from Baltimore. He has lived experience as a homeless person, someone who has lived on the street with a child, and he has been incredibly effective in working with the homeless population and really coming up with strategies to help get people off the street and into services.
Now, when we talk about strategies, there is a complexity to this issue that sort of escapes the average person. And I think it all goes back to the lack of affordable housing.
Yes.
A lot of people find themselves on the streets because of a lack of affordable housing. Do you have to fix that first?
Well, I think we have to do both things, right? And I can tell you a story about a neighbor of mine. I live in Central City, who we were at the encampments, and he came up to me. This is a neighbor who I had no idea had lost housing in Central City, largely pushed out because of STRs. And he came up to me and was like, "Miss Lesli, we need housing." He was there with his partner and their child. And he needed housing because there was a lack of affordable housing. So it's both and, right? We have to fix housing and create additional affordable housing, but we also need to get people who need services, the services that they need, addiction services, mental health services, medical services, basic needs met.
So let's dissect your news release.
Yeah.
About the establishment of your what is it, Home for Good?
Home for Good.
New Orleans.
Yes.
Who is going to be the lead agency on this particular program?
Sure, there are two lead agencies, United Way and GNOF, the Greater New Orleans Foundation, and they will house the money. So as you know, and I know you've been in this space for a long time, Unity received federal funds for housing vouchers. Now those are for vouchers only. So you imagine putting somebody into a new apartment and they have nothing. They might have, clothing, but they have no pans to cook with, bedding, basic necessities. And so what this fund does is go to providing those basic necessities through donations, also landlord incentives, and other services for people who might not otherwise have coverage through these federal funds through Unity.
Now, you talked a lot about what's needed. So who makes sure that this is supplied and who makes sure that it's sustainable?
Well, that's a great question. The City Council has allocated $500,000 this year to put into the Home for Good Fund. So this is a flex fund. And then what happens is that United Way or GNOF manages the requests that come in for the funds. So through Nate's office, the Office of Homeless Strategies and Services, a request comes in, for example, a move-in kit. So pots, pans, bedding, whatever. That request goes to United Way. United Way provides the funds to get that kit to a person who is newly housed.
Now, will this be under a city agency?
So So the Office of Homeless Services and Strategies, it's hard to say.
I know, it's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is. I'll call it OHSS. So Nate's office will oversee the fund, but really the fund is sitting within two nonprofits, which I think is a good way to go, because oftentimes through the procurement process of the city, it takes too long to get people the things that they need. And so having these funds sit with United Way and Ganoff, make sure that there's an ease of getting the money and getting the items to people.
So your obvious intention is to get people off of the streets.
Correct.
And to get them off the streets, not only in a permanent shelter, but to provide them services, because a lot of homeless people or unhoused people are out there because of mental health challenges.
Yeah, mental health challenges, addiction challenges. I know that you've been out there, and you can see why somebody might be addicted because they're living unsheltered. It's hard to live unsheltered. And so, yeah, we need to make sure that they're getting the services that they need, that they get addiction counseling, that they get mental health services. And that's why really we are pushing, not only as a city, but I'm trying to push as a state to get additional funding into the city for those services.
Any idea about a general cost for all of this? Because it sounds very expensive.
It is expensive, and the Home for Good Fund is a way that people can actually, rather than handing $1 or $5 to somebody who is asking them for money, they can go to homeforgoodnola.org and make a donation that goes directly into this fund. It's going to take a lot of money to get people off the street, but I think it's worth it. I think that, when you encounter someone who is unhoused, a lot of people are taken aback, but you have to realize that these folks are your neighbors. I just talked about my neighbor, your cousins, your sister. It's people who have lost support services that some of us are, quite frankly, lucky to have. And it's so easy, especially in this economy, to fall into homelessness.
This is my concern, Councilwoman Harris. When we talk about agencies that are in charge of executing these programs, that somehow they become bogged down, and and because they become bogged down, they become dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Because did you see the recent newspaper article about what's happening to the barrier shelters?
Yes, yeah, and
that's an example.
Oh,
of
absolutely.
what I'm talking about. Where there's no security, people are doing whatever they want to do in there. They're shooting drugs on the premises.
Yeah.
The whole thing is in disarray.
Yeah, and listen, I've known about this, and we have been trying to work with the city on the low barrier shelter for a while. The company that was running it, Start Corporation, was not being paid adequately by the city, and so we've had to increase the amount of funds that we put into the low barrier shelter. They were being paid $2 million. There's now a NOFA, which is a request for application to come in for another agency to run the shelter, and I can tell you that the agencies who are looking at applying for this NOFA are well known within our community, who provide services and addiction services, but right now that shelter is being run by Nate Fields, and one person can't do it all.
So when people read about situations like this, it sort of diminishes their confidence in whether the city is actually able to do anything effectively or not. And you're asking people to donate their resources.
Sure.
So how do you gain their confidence after seeing so much dysfunction?
Well, I will say this. We have not only created OHSS, Nate Fields' office, we've also engaged Clutch Consulting, which is a national consultant, to come in and really try to help us make a strategy and a plan that is sustainable and long-term. We've seen the closure of the Tchoupitoulas encampment, and we've seen the closure of the encampment in the Treme. And what happened with those encampment enclosures is that the people living there are housed. They're not being pushed aside. They have been housed in permanent housing. They're getting the services that they need. And again, Home for Good is a way for people to actually help out with these efforts. Again, I think that we are seeing evidence of how the strategy is working through the closure of the Tchoupitoulas encampment and the Treme encampment, and we will see more of that going forward.
Now, those encampments were closed, but some people complained that they were being pushed out without having adequate services provided for them. So how do you account for that?
So I think that people are seeing some other areas growing, some other areas around O.C. Haley and Calliope growing with additional people. I don't think those are the people who came from those encampments. The people from the encampments, we have data showing that they have been housed and that they're getting services. That's the whole purpose of really uniting all of the nonprofits together to provide services to the folks who have been newly housed out of those encampments. I think New Orleans has always been a city where you see people travel in and out. For 300 years, we've seen people travel in and out. I just read an article about a woman who's a musician now who hopped a train from, I think, Pittsburgh to New Orleans, lived unhoused for a while, got this experience, and now she's the famous musician. And so I think you're always going to see fluctuations in the encampments, but I think we're solving for people who have been unhoused for a long time.
I saw an interview with a lady on one of the local television news channels who was encamped previously at the Tchoupitoulas location, and she was saying, well, they just came in here and just moved everybody, and I really didn't have a place to go. They didn't provide anything for me. I wasn't on their list, so I had no place to go. They closed it, and they put up barricades and said that anybody who who they found here after this closure has taken place going to be arrested.
Yeah.
So that's kind of heavy-handed.
I think that what we've done is put up barriers and no trespassing signs, and we have law enforcement sort of circling to ensure that these encampments, once they are closed, are no longer habitable. And I think that's a strategy that we have to do, because once you clear an encampment, and you saw the Tchoupitoulas encampment, it had tons of stuff. And we do, as a city, we do encampment cleanups, and I went to one, and one woman had, bigger than the studio, just full of stuff. And
I've seen it.
Right, and so the city has to dispose of that stuff and then clean the area where the encampments are closed, and then maintain the closure there to make sure that nobody moves back in. As far as that woman, I don't know her situation, but I can tell you that the people who were on the list and who were living in that encampment were housed either permanently or put in hotels while awaiting permanent housing.
And in the aftermath of all of that, we are seeing that there are still some encampment areas.
Yeah.
What's being done about those?
Well, we are targeting, so this is the strategy. The strategy is to go into a particular encampment, provide intensive outreach through Unity and Travelers Aid and other agencies to get people signed up for a voucher program. You target one encampment, get everybody out and housed in services that they need, and then you close that encampment. So we are now working on a third encampment enclosure. We don't say where it is because we don't want folks to interfere with the services that are being provided. But I think very soon you'll see another encampment closed.
Give me an example of how someone would interfere if they knew where the next encampment clearing was going to take place.
Well, there are several things that might happen. It might be that somebody who is unhoused in another encampment then moves to this encampment, which increases the number because they hear that they will get a voucher, right? And so we need to make sure that the people who are fully in an encampment and who have been there for a long time, because again, the Tchoupitoulas encampment, a lot of those people had been there for years. To make sure that we're targeting folks who've been in a particular encampment and that there aren't new people coming in just to try to get a voucher who haven't been in that particular encampment.
So how do you handle a situation where someone might be untrustworthy? I mean, they just don't trust.
Yeah.
You know, they just don't trust the process. They don't trust city government, and especially a homeless person who figures, okay, I'm going to let them know I'm homeless, and that just means they're going to put a target on my back.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
is that a legitimate concern?
So from my understanding, and again, I've walked the encampments, but I'm not in the encampments every day because I have another job to
Yes.
do. From my understanding is that that's why you do intensive outreach. That's why you use agencies like Unity and Travelers Aid, because the workers there have a specific skill set to make sure that people trust them and build relationships. Because if I come up to you right now and say, hey, I'm going to move you from where you live into this other area, you're like, I just met you. I'm not going to trust you. You know? And so building a relationship, you might come to trust me and say, okay. And then you see other people who are getting the services that they need, housing that they need, and then you build that trust, you build that relationship. But you can't go in a one-off manner to somebody and say, hey, you have to move here, and we're taking you and putting you in a hotel, or we're putting you in a place that you might not want to live.
Okay, so Unity and Travelers Aid
Yes.
are tasked with finding shelter for the people.
So it's a combination of Unity, Travelers Aid, and Clutch Consulting is finding shelter for folks, which means, again, intensive outreach to landlords who might not otherwise want to house a formerly unhoused person. And so what Home for Good does is also provide landlord incentives. So a landlord might want an additional security deposit because they're scared of someone who's been formerly unhoused. And so this is what this fund does. So it's not only moving kits, but it's additional incentives for landlords who are incentivized to house formerly unhoused people.
This sounds like a big hill to climb.
It is. It is.
And so how is this all going to be coordinated and executed? That's what I'm having difficulty wrapping my mind around. How is this actually going to happen?
It actually is happening, and that's why the creation of the Office of Homelessness Strategies and Services was so critical, to have an office, and this is the first time the city has had this office.
Yes, I know.
Have someone in the city actually paying attention and coordinating all of the nonprofits. When you think about the amount of nonprofits that actually serve homeless folks here in the city, we have a ton of resources.
I know.
But they're not coordinated.
That's right.
And so that's what Nate's shop is doing, is coordinating services. When Clutch Consulting came in and surveyed New Orleans, they said, you have a plethora of services.
Yes.
We have everything that we need. And quite frankly, we have relatively few unhoused people compared to other cities.
This is true.
If you think about LA,
Oh yeah.
Seattle, even Dallas, they have way more unhoused people than we do. I think our last point in time count was 1,500 street homeless. That means people living on the street. We can, as a community, put our arms around those 1,500 people. And that's what Home for Good allows. It allows you to, as a citizen of New Orleans, donate $1. Every time you get a coffee, maybe donate $1 to this fund. And it will get people in housing, the services that they need, and what they need to the basic survival things that you need when you move into a house.
So the city will be in charge of bringing all these agencies together.
Yes.
So they will be under the umbrella of the city.
Well, they're already under the umbrella of Unity, many of these entities.
Oh, I know about the Unity of Greater New Orleans.
Right.
I know that Unity of Greater New Orleans works.
Yes.
So the city will be coordinating all of these people and becoming a super unity?
I think an agency, a city agency that ensures that the continuum of care is working and that people are coordinated. And while there are a lot of agencies within the Unity umbrella, there are also other agencies that are not. I just met with Lighthouse New Orleans, and they provide services that I didn't know about. And I said, are you part of the continuum? And they're not. There are a lot of ministries out there who provide services, meals, et cetera, to the unhoused community. And we just need to make sure that we're all under one tent and working together. So Unity provides a great service as the continuum of care for many nonprofits working in this area, but there are other agencies and other nonprofits that are actually working in this space.
So, you know what we're like in New Orleans. There's this environment of competition.
Yeah.
Of not getting along.
Yep.
Or taking my toy and going home.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to play with it.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that?
I think we have to pull together. And really what we've seen over the past 2 years is a coalition of Unity and the continuum of care and the nonprofits coming together with the business community, with other agencies and the city to really push forward with a plan. So the encampment decommissioning, that can only happen with the continuum of care, Unity, Travelers Aid, the city, and business folks actually paying attention to this too. So the money that Unity got, a lot of people pledged in-kind services, for example, Tulane, to provide health care and other mental health services. So it really takes someone to put their arms around it and bring people together. And again, I think when we think of an individual who is street homeless, some people have a perception of sort of gutter punk kids who are coming from Indiana and, you know, they want to live on the street. But I'm telling you, encountering a mother who has lived in her car with her 4 children without services because she's lost housing, that's the reality. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, all of this goes back to the lack of affordable housing.
Correct.
So we've talked at length about providing shelter for the unhoused. So what are you going to do about tackling the lack of affordable housing?
I'm glad you asked. So our office, my office, the District B office, is proposing a housing trust fund to be created. And that would mean a percentage of money coming out of the city's budget year over year to create a fund to seed affordable housing. We already have dedicated around $30 million for affordable housing for existing projects that have gap financing needs. And so we're seeing that money go to work to build actual new affordable housing. If you think about the HC3 building that's now in Aretha Castle Haley, where the old brownstone is, not the STRs. It's a whole different issue.
Yes, no, we're not talking about short-term rentals.
No, we're not talking about short-term rentals, although we can. But the HC3 project, that is an affordable housing, brand new units for seniors and folks who need affordable housing. So we're seeing more of that pop up and more projects come in line. With this housing trust fund, that means that when there's a gap in financing and housing is hard to build, the city can step in and provide that funding. The other thing that I'm hoping that the city, this housing trust fund can do is provide assistance to people. I think about my neighbors who have critical repairs needed to their homes.
Especially senior citizens.
Especially senior citizens. Need these critical repairs but can't afford them. And, you know, agencies like Habitat for Humanity and some other nonprofits provide great services, but their list is long. And so having these funds from the Housing Trust Fund to be dedicated to support and assistance to shore up housing so you're not losing it, I think this is critical. So I'm hoping that voters will have to, it will be a charter amendment. So it will go so it will go to the voters to decide whether or not that it's worth establishing this housing trust fund.
So we're talking about something that is going to remain in place regardless of what administration
Correct.
or who the mayor is
Correct.
or who the members of the city council are.
Correct, and that's the beauty of it. You can't take it away. So if the voters vote for, and I'm asking for 2%, it's not a lot of money. It comes to about $17 million a year. A charter amendment that creates this housing trust fund, regardless of who the mayor is, there will always be money in the city for affordable housing, creation and maintenance for people who might fall out of housing.
Yeah, this is revolutionary. You're asking the voters, to create a tax-based fund.
Yeah.
To build up a reserve for affordable housing.
Yes, and other cities have this. It's novel in New Orleans, but other cities do it and do it well. Pittsburgh, for example, does it. DC, Baltimore, they all have housing trust funds where a percentage of the city budget goes into a trust that not only goes out into the community to build affordable housing, but also has interest that accrues. There's bonding capability attached to it. And so we can actually, as a community, vote to create this housing trust fund. And I'll be out there campaigning for it and asking for people to vote for it.
So when might we see this campaign begin, and when might we be asked to vote for it?
So I think that we're going to push for it to be on the November ballot. There's going to be a lot on the ballot,
soon, yeah.
So relatively soon. So you'll see me more and more out there, and not only me, but other nonprofits and other advocacy folks out there who are in the housing space will be campaigning for this housing trust fund. It has wide support from other city council members, from the mayor's administration, as well as some of the housing advocates. I'm very excited about it.
So you brought us news about 2 programs.
Yeah.
One to address the unhoused, and 2 to address the lack of affordable housing.
Yes. Yeah.
Give me a brief synopsis of both.
Okay.
Because we have just a little time left.
Sure. So the first is Home for Good, and it takes donations. There's a website, homeforgoodneworleans.org. You can go on right now and make a donation. It doesn't matter how much or how little. It can be $1, it can be $500, and that money goes towards getting people housing kits, landlord assistance, and other services for the unhoused. Separately, you'll be seeing me campaign for New Orleans Housing Trust Fund, which will be a permanent trust fund to go towards creation of affordable housing, as well as maintenance of current housing for people who are low income, so they don't fall into homelessness.
Okay, well, the first part sounds like it's going to be a lot to untangle.
Yeah.
The second part, you're going to have to convince voters to trust you.
Yes. And I hope they do.
Are you concerned?
I think that I'm trustworthy, but I'm
talking about city government as an institution.
Yeah, well, I think projects like the HC3 project, which also had city funding behind it, goes to show that we can, as a city, create housing, that we can, as a city, provide funding where there might be gaps necessary to create affordable housing.
So, have you bounced this idea off of the people who have been trying to do this for the past 2 decades?
This idea did not come from me alone. Okay. So it really, the Housing Trust Fund has come about because of discussions with housing advocates who are really, really pushing for the creation of the Housing Trust Fund. And they've been in the space for years and years, longer than I have. And I think it is an idea that works in other cities and that can work here.
All right, we're going to have some of them on the show to talk about this.
Great.
So good luck with that. We'll be keeping an eye on you for sure.
Good, and I'm happy to come back and talk more as we get closer to the vote.
Thank you, Councilmember Lesli Harris.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us on Affordable Housing Matters today. We hope you found our program informative and educational. If you would like to rewatch this or any of our past episodes, please scan the QR code on your screen. That will take you to our WLAE YouTube page, where you can view all of our programs at your leisure. I'm Norman Robinson, and we will see you next time right here on Affordable Housing Matters.